was the recipient of Rachel. She was thawed, she began growing, and if within the first 14 days of her growth they transferred her to her mother's uterus, she'd live, most likely. The success rate has gotten pretty high. But instead they took an Australian jellyfish gene, inserted it into her body at a single cell stage to see if she would glow in the dark. And they were successful. As Rachel grew over the course of the 14 days, she began glowing in the dark. All of her organs, all of her body, until they decided that the experiment was successful and they killed her. We objected, and a spokesperson at the National Institute of Health said the Cornell work would not be classified as gene therapy in need of federal review because a test tube embryo is not considered a person under the law. You see how we're always going back to what is it? What is the fetus? The Supreme Court Justice Zach asked in '73. What is the embryo, the human embryo? Fast forward to just a year ago, right now this time, almost to this week. 1 year ago, we were in the final stages of passage of the fetal pain bill, which would ban abortion in Georgia from 20 weeks onward. It was a personhood compliant bill. There was no class of human life, rape, incest, fetal deformity, that we identified in the bill that could be killed. We didn't make that mistake. And so our fetal pain bill, much as many of them, was a pure personhood compliant bill. And we were very proud that it had passed the House and was now in the final hours of passage in the Senate when the Medical Association came and 4 senators shut it down and attached at the last minute an exception clause for fetal anomaly. But look at how it read. The fetus is anencephalic, or a diagnosis of Potter syndrome, or a congenital or chromosomal anomaly is made that is incompatible with life. That was lifted right out of Germany's public policy manual of 1920. Same exact language. Beginning the slippery slope. These are children with anencephaly. They don't die immediately at birth, like many of the diagnoses proclaim. I have held them in my arms because we had a couple in our church that provided hospice care specifically to children born with anencephaly. They would hold them, nurture them, love on them, treat them. Their human dignity was intact. And then they celebrated their first birthday. And then they celebrated their second birthday. And then I held them as they smiled and laughed as they celebrated their third birthday. Not one, but several of these children that were diagnosed with conditions incompatible with life. But I tell you, they brought joy to the couple. They brought joy to our church. They were, it's a ministry what we do with those that are the most vulnerable in our midst. Any culture can be judged by how we treat the most vulnerable. And here is where it changes. This happened January 23rd, 2013, in Salon magazine, feminist pro-abort magazine, writing the editorial content for the anniversary of Roe v. Wade from a pro-abortion standpoint. And guess what? How many of you saw the Time magazine cover that says Roe v. Wade, a tremendous right for women, and we've been losing ever since, was the tagline. We've been losing to the pro-lifers ever since. And in the article, they made the proclamation, they're masterful at gaining the high ground by calling themselves pro-life, and we're labeled pro-death. And we've lost in that arena. So what we need to do is admit that we're taking human life, and that human life is not nothing. Mary Elizabeth Williams went a little further. So what if abortion ends life? The fetus is indeed a life worth sacrificing. To not admit that a fetus is a human life is the argument from Roe v. Wade. The justices couldn't determine when life began and whether or not the fetus was defensible or recognized under our law. But they're saying, well, of course it's life. The fetus is life. Here's the complicated reality in which we live. All life is not equal. That's a difficult thing for liberals like me to talk about, yet a fetus can be a human life without having the same rights as the woman in whose body it resides. Was it George Orwell in Animal Farm that said all animals are equal, some are just more equal than others? You remember that? It was Aldous Huxley in 1932 that said we are going to decant humans in an external womb and classify who lives and who dies. What do all these people have in common? They believe that all human life is not equal. Ideas have consequences. We turned a corner when both the Time article on January 22nd came out and then the article in Salon magazine, January 23rd. The pro-aborts were flagging a new strategy. Agree with the pro-lifers. It's life. But so what? So what? All life is not equal. All human, so what it's a human life? Some humans have the ability to destroy other humans based on a set of criteria that we define. And we saw every one of these groups say the same thing. Are we going to see the school buses again? What about the smokes coming out of the smokestacks as we remove the useless eaters from our midst? The elderly and infirm. Do you realize that this is what's called a utilitarian philosophy of government? When your utility as a citizen is good, you have value. But when your utility is diminished due to illness, age, or other genetic anomaly, then you are a useless eater. You're a liability to the culture, to the resources that are being expended on your care. And therefore you have a duty to die. Instead of the right to life, you have a duty to die. And this is one of the things we're going to see in the baby boomer generation. As the baby boomers become aware that you can go to the hospital, and in my condition with diabetes, my score is evaluated. It's called a quality of life score. It's in Obamacare, it's written up, it's described how it will be applied in a hospital setting. Peter Singer helped to devise the whole thing. Good, example that he is. And if I go in with a life-threatening condition and they look at my score and it doesn't meet a certain level, then I will be denied life-threatening treatment. And I can't even use my own money to treat myself. And the reason for that is that any hospital, medical establishment that takes my money will be removed from the system itself under threat of removal. And so it won't be available in a life-threatening case. We have arrived at a utilitarian solution under our current practices that will go into place next year under Obamacare. And what does it mean? If ideas have consequences, this is what happened to Germany. God's judgment fell upon Germany as a culture, as it has fallen on all cultures that devalue human life and ignore the image of God in man as a valuable restraint upon policy. And that's what we're doing now. How much have I mentioned abortion in this whole thing with Germany? It's been people with disabilities, fetal anomalies. It's been expanding classes to the deaf, the dumb, the mentally insane, and so on and so on and so forth, until it comes down to people with certain beliefs and practices that don't meet the utilitarian demands that government has